Hey guys, welcome to this week's episode of Threat Assessment. Just before we get started, I want to mention again that we do have an in-game channel called Threat Assessment Public. Feel free to drop by and say hi to us, and maybe help out some new players that don't know how to fit their ships. It'd be cool to see you all there. And also, we do have a Facebook group for the channel itself, not necessarily just this series. So feel free to stop over, the link is in the description, and I'll flash it here on screen. And last but not least, if you like this series, hit that like button and hit that subscribe button if you're new around here. I'd love to see you around in the future, and I hope you enjoy the show. Without further ado, here we go. This week, we're going to be focusing on the Myrmidon. Yeah, it's one of those that I probably have the most difficult spelling, but it is also a very versatile battlecruiser, and it's one that the Gallente players really love to bring up when we're arguing which race is the best. Simply because it's true, the Myrmidon is fantastic at what it does, and it's a really fun ship to fly when you know how to fly well. So, that's the point of this video. Let's figure out how to fly that well. But first, let's talk about the skills. The per level bonuses for the Myrmidon are 10% bonus to drone damage and hit points, and a 7.5% bonus to the armor rep amount. The roll bonuses this ship gets are it can use one command burst to start with, and this can be modified with rigs of course to get up to a total of 3. And it also gets a 50% bonus to the command burst area of effect, meaning that its bursts can affect a wider radius and thus more ships, or it doesn't have to be as central in the fleet to make sure everyone's getting the bursts. Another roll bonus it gets is a 12.5% bonus to drone micro warp speed. This allows them to keep up with targets that normally would outrun them, but also allows you to pull them back faster if they start taking damage. Next thing I want to talk about is what kind of fits. You kind of probably want to know how to fit this ship, so let's talk about that a little bit. First off, I want to say that the fits that I'm using in these videos are going to be a little bit different than potentially conventional fits for the Myrmidon. First off, because I'm thunderdoming basically with some people, but also I don't really like to fit MJDs to my ships MJDs to my PvP ships, simply because I'm a member of the No Grid Left Uncleared guild, so I don't really bail. I fight until either I go down or they go down. But here are some fits that I made up with that I used for these fights. Okay, I know this one's a little derpy, but I just wanted to be weird. You should never ever shield tank a Myrmidon. I just wanted to see if I could do it. I know it's kind of a stupid fight here, but I was trying to have fun. On a ship that has an armor rep bonus, you don't typically want to throw a shield rep on there. You want to stick to the armor. But some popular fittings that you will see with this are, you'll have self-boosting. It's usually pretty common, but it's also really optional, simply because it takes up one of your weapon slots. You don't have a utility high. You have 5 highs and 5 gun slots, so typically people will fill those up with guns. Another fit that I see a lot is the triple rep fit. This is pretty mean. You don't get a lot of DPS out of it, but you can tank a lot of damage, especially if you're self-boosting for armor reps or even armor energizing charges. A lot of times people put medium blasters in the highs, but I've also seen light blasters for the little stuff that gets close. I haven't done this personally, so I don't really know, but I've definitely seen 5 light blasters in the highs. I've even done small lasers before. And sometimes people just don't even put guns in the highs. They'll put newts, nosses, just to get rid of smaller targets, or if they really need to handle a lot of different targets at the same time. But one thing that is for sure is you always need to make sure you have plenty of light drones, and even medium drones, because it's pretty easy to defang a Myrmidon, so you want to make sure you have several sets of useful drones to pull out. The mid slots are where it gets really confusing. What do you put in the mid slots of this ship? It has so many. So One way I've seen it fit is they'll put a micro warp drive, a cap booster, a scram, and 2 webs. It's easy enough. You can get moving when you need to. You have the cap booster to keep yourself capped up. Yeah, don't try passive capping this thing. It really doesn't work super well. There's another fit that I've seen people do that I don't really like, but I've seen people do it that I'll get to later. But the scram shuts down micro warp drives, obviously, and the double webs will make sure things that are afterburning are still moving fairly slowly. So you can apply pretty well to them, and your heavy drones can probably keep up and apply to them, which is nice. I've also seen the micro warp drive, afterburner, and micro jump drive fit. It's a lot of mobility. I don't recommend triple prop, but if you're looking for flexibility in a fight, that's your way. The other 2 mids they have are a cap booster and a scram. The last fit, I kind of mentioned it before, is an afterburner, a large cap battery, scram, web, and cap recharger. I haven't figured out exactly how to make this work. I try and come up with all the fits on my own, and I haven't been able to find online this fit, but I've heard people talking about it and that they've been able to work. I think they use cap implants to keep themselves stable, but I'm not entirely sure. All these, they're pretty solid ones. I personally favor the first one, the micro warp, cap booster, scram, double web, just because of the application you get, and also I usually end up turning my micro warp drive off mid-fight if I'm like facing another blaster boat that's right on top of me, and there's no way I'm gonna get out from under him. And he's got me scrammed the whole time. Might as well just turn it off and get that cap back, because remember, a micro warp drive has an innate cap total capacitor amount debuff. So when you turn that off, you get that extra capacitor room back. You don't get the cap, but your regen rate is increased because the total capacity goes up. Since this is a drone boat and it's got kind of a weird drone bandwidth, it's important to talk about how many drones or what drone layout you should use. It's got 100 meters cubed bandwidth and a 200 meter cube drone base. You can hold quite a few drones, but you don't have enough bandwidth to fit an entire flight of larges. So I've seen people go 3 heavies and 2 medium drones. I prefer the Navy Ogres and then some Tech 2 Hammerheads personally. I've also seen people go a Gecko and 4 medium combat drones. You always want to make sure you have a full flight of lights at the very least. I like to also have a full flight of mediums. But also I've seen a lot of people do like 2 or 3 different flights for single EM damage, only thermal damage. That's also a good idea, especially when you're fighting against some ships that you know have a hole in them, or if you want to really experiment with people's tanks like you're expecting a longer fight. In the shorter fights, you won't really have time to really feel out people, but if you're fighting a bigger ship, it might be worth doing that if that's what you're planning on doing. I know a lot of stuff you can't really plan ahead, but it's important to think about, okay, what do I want to engage? What is my optimal scenario here? And we'll talk a little bit about what a Myrmidon should and shouldn't go after. But first, let's talk about what should you bling on this? It's a Tech 1 battlecruiser, and it's really effective as is. I would personally say don't bling anything. I mean, you can get the Geckos, but I mean, those are already more than the cost of the hull. So maybe don't do that. I can't see a reason to bling anything on this ship, because it's slow if you get caught in an engagement. You're probably just gonna go down if they bring like 5 or 6 dudes if they over escalate. You might get a good fight or 2, but more than often a Myrmidon draws quite the crowd, so you're gonna end up going down. It's just a matter of how many people you can take down with you. So I wouldn't recommend getting A-type medium reppers. It's really not worth that. So the flight pattern, how do you fly this thing? Well, typically you want to get up as close as you possibly can, just because you're slow, and if you don't get range dictated right away and they're a kitey ship, you've lost it. You can't dictate range for most of that fight. With a micro warp drive, you can try and slingshot people around, but unless you're a really good pilot and they're not a good pilot, it's not going to work super well.
Alright, I'm pausing this right here because this fight, this one with the Gila, what I'm talking about here happened. This guy set up his orbit, I couldn't break it, so I went in a straight line waited for him to kind of swing around me, and then he had to kind of burn to catch up, so he had to burn right at me. I turned back at him, he wasn't paying attention, and I was able to get a scram on him. So go back to about 6 minutes, start the fight over, and just watch what happens.
And your drones, I mean, they can get out there pretty easily, as long as you got the right set of them out there. If you're fighting a daredevil and you try and throw heavy drones at it, it's not going to keep up. I think even light drones have a little bit of a problem keeping up with that, but your roll bonus of your drone speed will help keep that from happening. Something to be wary of, though, when you're fighting something that's a distance away from you, if they try and attack your drones and defang you, I mean, it's going to be harder to bring those things back. You got to be a lot more on the ball to make sure you don't start losing drones, because your drone bay is not that big. I mean, it's sizable, but if you lose 2 heavy drones, that's a quarter of your drone bay. So you got to be very careful. And that's, again, why I say you want to be right on top of people, because then if you have newts, if you have nosses, you can throw out your heavy drones, you can use your webs and everything. Even if you have guns, you can just take them out, just like right there. If you hold them right in front of you, you can use your blasters to full effect. You can use really whatever weapon system you have to full effect if you're right on top of them. So when you're flying a Myrmidon, what should you engage? Pretty much any small gang of like smaller ships. I'd say in a Myrmidon, you're more than capable of taking on 2 or 3 Tech 1 cruisers, and even most other battle cruisers you'll be able to give a run for their money. I mean, a Brutix is going to cause you problems because you both want to be right on top of each other, and being able to tank a Brutix can get pretty rough if you can't nude them out. Especially a hull tanked Brutix. That's nasty. Things that you don't want to engage, I kind of just mentioned it, a Brutix or something that has like really heavy nuding that you won't be able to cap boost out of. Something with like huge like DPS isn't going to be a huge issue as long as they're not like well over your tank. With a Myrmidon, the triple rep fit, you can, I think with boosters, and if you take a strong exile pill, you can tank over 1,000 DPS fairly easily. Especially if you're moving around and even mitigating just a little bit, you should be able to tank, I guess, a standard Brutix DPS. Maybe, I think that gets up to like 1100, and that might be a little iffy, especially if they have a newt or something. But other than that, you can tank quite a bit. So, Myrmidon, super durable. I would avoid kitey stuff. Like an Orthrus is probably going to give you problems. Assignable, maybe, if it stays out at range on you. But one ship that is your class or below really isn't the concern. It's things above your class that are the problem. And this causes problems when you're out roaming with it. I've had several experiences where I've taken a Myrmidon out. Like, oh, there's a small gang. Cool, let me go try and fight it. Oh, now there's 4 battleships. This is over now. Which kind of goes into the bait part of it, which I'll get to that later. So let's talk about the overall threat assessment here. Going back into our 4 main scores of offense, defense, flexibility, and maneuverability, we'll start with offense. The offense, it's pretty decent. I'd give it a moderate. Well, no, I'm going to say high, just because of the flexibility of what its offense actually means. Your drones, you can change damage types if you need to. You can apply to smaller or bigger ships as needed. You get a solid drone damage bonus with that 10% per level. And oftentimes, just even if your DPS isn't that high, you'll just be able to like outlast them. Or you can fit newts and nosses in the highs and just be able to take them out that way without even your DPS really mattering. If you can keep them from repping, your DPS will eventually take them down. Which, now onto the defense. This is a critical point of the Myrmidon. Because of its rep bonus, you can rep so much with a multi-rep setup. And this is where it also goes back into the ability to outlast your opponent is huge. If you can just sit there and tank him all day, 9 times out of 10 in a PvP scenario, he'll run out of capacitor. And if you can just tank him like passively, you're your cap boosters, if you put Navy 800s in there, even normal 800s, but if you just put those in there, that'll give you enough capacitor to run 2, 3, maybe even 4 rep cycles with your normal reps. That's a long time. You're buying yourself a lot of time.
Alright, hey, it's me interrupting myself while I'm recording again. Just to clarify what I mean here by passively tank, I mean not using cap charges. Like if you play with your capacitor and keep it around that 33% mark and you can tank him without using an ANSI repper, that's what I mean by passively tank. I didn't really explain it very well when I did the first take on this, so I'm interrupting myself in the middle of editing. Most small ships aren't going to have DPS above 300-400, especially if they're fit to tank, so you shouldn't need boosters, you shouldn't need to use your ANSI repper to tank that, especially if you're dual rep fit. You can tank that with 2 reppers pretty easily. Even 1 repper could probably tank that, and if you have Nosses or Newts in the highs, you can probably cap them out before you even need to start using boosters.
And if you just continually wear down on them, not many things are going to be able to tank that for very long, especially if they're using ancillary reps, which most other ships your size of the battlecruiser don't have that rep bonus, so you won't have to worry too much about that. As far as flexibility goes, this thing has crazy flexibility. With the number of low slots it has, the 5 mid slots, you can do a ton of different things, and I think it was pretty clear that you could be really picky with what you wanted in the mids. You could really do whatever you want. In the lows, you have room for dual, triple rep. You have 7 lows, so you can do quite a bit. Triple rep, damage control, and 2 energized adaptive nanos. So you're pretty good there. And I even did that shield fit before, and that worked out. I'm going to test it a little bit more before I actually try and throw people off with it. But that worked as pretty well bait, so you can really do whatever you want. This thing doesn't really have a fleet role, so really you have to do it solo, which is why flexibility is only high. Otherwise I'd give it higher if it was actually popular in like bigger fleets. This is just a really popular solo ship because of its flexibility and what you can fully do with it with your DPS and whatnot. The maneuverability of this ship, though, it's not great. You can triple rep it, not triple rep, I'm sorry. You can triple prop mod it and do fantastic with it. But that still doesn't get around that. Even with a Tech 2 micro warp drive, I was only doing about 1100 meters per second. And that's really not that great, and you're oftentimes going to be scrammed down, so it doesn't really matter. Afterburner, not even close to micro warp drive speeds, as we all know. So it's not super maneuverable. It doesn't turn on a dime, that's for sure, so it's really hard to slingshot people around you. But overall, I'd give this a very high threat. As a solo pilot, with this ship you can do crazy things, you can get amazing fights. Real solid footage material with this thing. You might get dropped on pretty heavy quite a few times, but overall you're going to have a lot of fun with this ship. It's a lot of fun. It's very active. There's always a bunch of buttons to hit with your reppers, your mid slots, your guns, commanding your drones. So many things you have to pay attention to. And as far as fighting a Myrmidon, this is a tough ship to take down when the pilot knows what they're doing. It's not something that you just can approach lightly, like, oh yeah, there's this over in the next system, I'm just going to take this thing over and kill it myself. No, it's a dangerous ship. It can surprise you in many ways. The bait probability? Maybe. I don't think this is a really high bait probability ship, but who knows, somebody might use it. It's capable of bait tanking, unless you can just alpha through it, which still, as a battlecruiser with its EHP wall of that, I think with triple reps I still had about 30,000 EHP, which is pretty hard to alpha through when you're in a smaller fleet. Because if you can't alpha through it, odds are it's going to be able to wrap right back up. You're going to have to try again. But I don't often see this as bait. Usually it's just a solo ship. Alright, so it's that time of the show where I'm just going to pass it off to you guys. What do you think of this ship? Did I mess everything up? Do you have a differing opinion on how you use this ship? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you guys think about it. If you guys have any suggestions for the next ship, please drop them in the comments below as well, or let me know in game. Don't be afraid to talk to me in game. I'd love to meet all of you guys. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button. Next episode's coming out soon. TM. I've got it written down, but I don't have any of the footage, so I have time to switch it up. But in the meantime, guys, please take care of yourself, and I will see you later.